I jolted awake, a scream dying in my throat. Sweat soaked through my t-shirt as I sat up. Brian's face appeared in my mind, that peaceful expression as the black surface pulled him in, dissolving him into nothing. The symbols crawled behind my eyelids when I blinked, whispering things I couldn't understand but couldn't forget. The red numbers on my bedside clock read 3:17 a.m. Another night, another nightmare. Same as every night since Alaska. My apartment was silent except for the sound of the refrigerator and the occasional car passing on the street below. 2 months in this place, and it still didn't feel like home. Just a temporary shelter, a place to hide while I figured out what to do next. The orange prescription bottle sat on my nightstand where it had remained since Dr. Reeves had pressed it into my hand. Memory suppression therapy, they called it. Take the pills, and the traumatic elements would fade away. I'd still remember Alaska, but the sharp edges would dull. The horror would become manageable. The truth would become optional. I hadn't touched it. Pushing myself out of bed, I padded to the kitchen without turning on the lights. My hand trembled as I filled the coffee maker, not from fear, but from rage. The military had known. They'd known exactly what waited for us beneath the ice. Through the kitchen window, I could see the black SUV parked across the street. Different vehicle, same purpose. They'd been watching me since my return, probably reporting my every move back to Colonel Hawkins. They were making sure I wasn't talking to anyone I shouldn't. My phone showed 3 missed calls from the colonel. He'd been calling daily, his voice always carrying that same calm authority that once commanded my respect. Now it only fueled my anger. James, your therapy sessions aren't optional. This is about your recovery. Recovery. As if what I'd seen was an illness to be cured, rather than a truth to be reckoned with. Coffee in hand, I moved to the living room and turned on a single lamp. The walls that had once been bare were now covered with newspaper clippings, printouts, and my own hastily scrawled notes. The official story stared back at me from a dozen headlines. Tragic accident at Arctic Research Station claims 17 lives. Methane explosion destroys climate research facility. 4 soldiers awarded medals for rescue attempt. Rescue attempt. I almost laughed at that one. We weren't sent to rescue anyone. They had issued us heavy weaponry. We had strict orders about civilian contact. They put us in immediate quarantine when we returned. Dr. Emerson had accessed those encrypted files so easily, like she knew exactly what she was looking for. They knew. Maybe not everything, but enough. Enough to send 5 soldiers instead of a rescue team, and enough to prepare for violence instead of evacuation. I unlocked the bottom drawer of my desk, the only space in the apartment that felt truly private. Inside lay Brian's personal effects. His watch stopped at the exact moment the cave began to collapse. His dog tags, which should have gone to his sister but somehow ended up in my possession, and a sealed envelope, its edges worn from my handling. I delivered his letter to Sarah as promised. I held her while she wept for a brother whose body would never come home, but I couldn't tell her the truth. What could I possibly say? Your brother wasn't killed in an explosion. He was absorbed into an alien monolith that spoke directly to his mind. My fingers traced the jagged scar running along my right forearm as Doc, Martinez, and I fled the collapsing cave. Sometimes it ached, especially before rain, a physical reminder that what happened wasn't just another nightmare. Martinez had taken the pills. The last time I saw him, he was working intelligence analysis, believing he'd survived a terrorist ambush at a research station. He smiled easily now. The haunted look was gone from his eyes. Sometimes I envied him. Wilson never made it out of the cave. I still saw his face in my dreams. The moment sanity left his eyes and something else took its place. I'd been the one to pull the trigger. Another memory the pills would help me process. Doc committed suicide 3 weeks after our return. Official report said PTSD. But I knew better. He'd started researching crystalline formations in brain tissue, asking too many questions. Then suddenly, he was gone. That left me alone with the truth. The coffee had gone cold in my mug. Another sleepless night gone. Another day of pretending to recover while searching for answers. My phone buzzed with a text. Colonel Hawkins, reminding me of my therapy appointment at 10. Dr. Reeves would be expecting me, ready with her gentle voice and probing questions, ready to suggest once again that the medication might help, that forgetting was healing. I set the phone down without responding. The memories were agonizing. Brian's face as the monolith pulled him in. The researcher's screams bouncing through metal corridors. Those alien symbols that seemed to change every time you looked directly at them. But these memories were all I had left of Brian and the truth about what lurked beneath Alaska's ice. I wouldn't let them take that from me. Not with therapy, not with pills, not with their carefully constructed lies. The truth was all I had left, and I intended to keep it. The morning sun came through my blinds. My apartment walls were covered in evidence. Not the sanitized version they wanted me to believe, but the actual events that led us to that cave. I closed my eyes and let myself sink into memory. 3 months ago, Fort Bragg. I arrived with my squad to the briefing room. Brian slid into the seat beside me, flipping a pen between his fingers. $5 says it's another training exercise disguised as an emergency, he whispered. I shook my head. Colonel wouldn't pull us off leave for a drill. The room quieted as Colonel Hawkins entered, followed by a woman I'd never seen before. Gentlemen, Hawkins said, this is Dr. Victoria Emerson. She'll be providing mission parameters. Dr. Emerson stepped forward, tablet in hand. At 0600 yesterday morning, we lost contact with a climate research facility in northern Alaska. She tapped her screen, projecting satellite images onto the wall. 47 personnel, including 17 security contractors. No communication since the blackout, no response to hails. Martinez leaned forward. Weather-related communications failure? Weather was clear when contact was lost, Emerson replied without looking up. The facility has redundant systems specifically designed for Arctic conditions. Hawkins took over. Your mission is simple extraction. Get in, secure any survivors, retrieve essential research materials, and get out. Sir, with respect, I said. This sounds like a search and rescue operation. Why us? The colonel's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes hardened. Because those are your orders, Sergeant Mitchell. We moved to equipment allocation. The loadout wasn't standard for extraction. Heavy weaponry, tactical gear, enough firepower to wage a small war. Sir, Brian spoke up, if this is a climate research station, why the firepower? Hawkins paused. The facility is remote. Wildlife concerns. What kind of wildlife needs this kind of stopping power? Doc muttered, examining the med kit he'd been issued, loaded with unusual sedatives and restraints. One more thing, Hawkins added. You are not, under any circumstances, to engage with civilians without direct authorization from me or Dr. Emerson. Is that clear? 4 hours later, we were on a C-130 bound for Alaska. Brian methodically field-stripped his rifle beside me, though we both knew it was already clean. You think they're telling us everything? He asked quietly. I glanced toward the front of the plane where Hawkins and Emerson sat in conversation, heads bent close. Not a chance. Martinez joined us, dropping his voice. I did a quick search on that facility before Wheels Up. Official records show climate research, ice core samples, and atmospheric monitoring. Standard stuff. But, I prompted. But the funding doesn't match the mission. Way too much money for ice cores. Wilson nudged Doc, who was still organizing his medical supplies. What's with the elephant tranquilizers, Doc? Michael Sullivan held up a vial. Not just sedatives. These are heavy-duty antipsychotics, enough to knock out a person for days. Maybe they're having a bad reaction to the midnight sun, Wilson joked, but nobody laughed. Brian reassembled his rifle with practiced movements. Maybe it's some kind of outbreak. Mass hysteria from being cooped up too long. Or bioweapons research gone wrong, Martinez suggested. Wilson's eyes widened. You think that place was cooking up some new superbug? Would explain the hazmat gear, Doc replied, pointing to the sealed containers at the rear of the plane. I kept my voice low. Whatever it is, they're not telling us for a reason. Stay sharp, follow protocol, but keep your eyes open. The others nodded. We'd been through enough together to understand. Official orders were one thing. Survival sometimes required reading between the lines. We landed during a blizzard. The cold was intense as we disembarked, Arctic wind finding every gap in our cold weather gear. 3 miles to the facility, Hawkins shouted over the wind. Move out. We trudged through knee-deep snow, visibility reduced to a few yards ahead. For almost an hour, we pushed forward in near silence, conserving energy. There, Martinez called out finally, pointing ahead. The research station emerged from the white haze. No lights visible, no movement, just a dark shape against the white. Hawkins gestured us forward. Mitchell, you and Callahan take point. Standard entry protocol. Brian and I approached the main entrance, weapons ready. The airlock door was unlocked, our first sign that something was very wrong. Security protocols for facilities this remote were usually stringent. I radioed, Command, we're entering the facility. Door is unsecured. Emerson's voice crackled back. Proceed with caution. Locate the main server room. The airlock cycled, and we stepped into the facility. Emergency lighting gave off a dim red light through empty corridors. The temperature inside was barely warmer than outside. The heating systems had failed or been shut down. Clear, Brian whispered, checking the first junction. The rest of the team filed in behind us. Doc flipped on his tactical light, sweeping it down the hallway. The beam showed blood on the wall. Blood, he confirmed, touching it with a gloved finger. Dried, at least 24 hours old. We moved deeper into the facility, following a trail of destruction. Overturned furniture, shattered equipment, and more blood, some in pools, some in smears that showed where bodies had been dragged. The first body we found was in the cafeteria. A man in a security uniform sprawled across a table, his throat torn open. Not by a weapon, by fingernails. His own fingernails, judging by the skin and blood beneath them. Jesus, Wilson whispered. 3 more bodies in the kitchen area. One had bashed his head repeatedly against a wall. Another had methodically severed his own arteries with a kitchen knife. The third had simply put a gun in his mouth. The strangest thing wasn't the self-inflicted violence, it was the expressions. Each face looked calm, as if relieved. Mitchell, Hawkins called from the corridor. Server room. I left Brian supervising Wilson and joined the colonel. He and Emerson stood in what appeared to be the main research hub, a circular room lined with monitoring equipment and data terminals. At the central desk sat a man, slumped forward, a pistol still clutched in his right hand, a bullet hole in his right temple, and blood had dried underneath his head. Dr. Sergei Laszlo, Emerson said, lead researcher. Even though his death was violent, Laszlo's face had the same calm expression I'd seen on the others. His left hand rested on a journal, pages open and stained with blood spatter. Emerson carefully moved the hand and took the journal while Hawkins accessed the main computer. Systems still operational, Hawkins noted. Emergency power only. Check the security feeds, Emerson ordered, scanning Laszlo's journal with narrowed eyes. I moved to the security station and began reviewing footage. The system had continued recording even after power to most of the facility had been cut. Colonel, I called, you need to see this. The footage showed the deterioration of the facility over approximately 72 hours. It began with researchers acting strangely, staring into space, abandoning tasks mid-action. Then came insomnia. Camera timestamps showed the same personnel wandering the corridors at all hours. Next, Violence erupted, seemingly random at first, then organized. Researchers attacking security personnel, then each other. The most disturbing sequence showed a middle-aged scientist in a lab coat methodically smashing his head against a wall. No hesitation, no flinching from pain. Just mechanical, purposeful self-destruction. When he finally collapsed, his colleagues stepped over his body without reaction. Doc joined us, his face grim. I've examined 6 bodies so far. The pattern is consistent. 2 types of death. Violent self-harm with no defensive wounds, or what appears to be peaceful suicide. Nothing in between. It's like some just fought it and others gave in, I said. Doc nodded. The violent ones. It's like they were trying to stop something in their heads. The peaceful ones. They surrendered to it. Found something, Martinez called from across the room. He stood by an auxiliary terminal, its screen displaying a map of the immediate area. There's a cave system 3 miles north of here. According to these logs, they were conducting regular expeditions there. Emerson closed Laszlo's journal with a snap. Show me. As Martinez pulled up the data, Brian entered the room. We've cleared the residential wing. 11 more bodies, same pattern. Whatever happened here killed everyone. Not everyone, Wilson called from the corridor. The logs show 47 personnel. We've only found 22 bodies so far. A chill settled in my stomach. So where are the others? Hawkins turned to Emerson, their eyes meeting in a look that confirmed my suspicion. They knew more than they were telling us. Gather your gear, Hawkins ordered. We're spending the night here. Tomorrow we investigate those caves. I glanced at Brian. His expression matched my unease. Whatever had happened in this facility, the answers lay in those caves. And something told me we wouldn't like what we found. Hawkins powered down the security terminal. The images of researchers destroying themselves stayed in my mind. We bunk here tonight, Hawkins announced, checking his watch. Eero 600 departure to investigate those caves. I want full gear and maximum ammunition. Sir, I said, shouldn't we call this in? Get a quarantine team out here? Hawkins fixed me with a cold stare. Communications are for emergency extraction only. Those are standing orders. With respect, Colonel, we've got 22 dead bodies and evidence of some kind of mass psychosis. That qualifies as an emergency. Your concerns are noted, Sergeant. He turned away, effectively ending the conversation. Dr. Emerson and I will be in the facility director's office. The rest of you conduct a thorough sweep of the remaining sections. I want to know everything about this place by morning. Martinez caught my eye as the colonel left, giving a slight shake of his head. We both knew something wasn't right, but questioning orders further would only make things worse. Let's split up, I said to the team. Doc, check the medical bay. Wilson, communications center. Martinez, equipment storage. Brian and I will take the main laboratory. Brian fell in beside me as we moved down the corridor toward the lab. They knew, he muttered once we were out of earshot. Hawkins and Emerson, they knew what we'd find here. Yeah. Question is, what else aren't they telling us? The main laboratory took up almost an entire wing of the facility. Workstations lined the walls, abandoned mid-task. Coffee cups sat half-empty, some with lipstick marks still visible on the rims. One desk had a framed photo of a smiling family, knocked over in whatever panic had swept through this place. Check the computers, I told Brian. I'll look for physical records. Most of the systems were locked down, requiring credentials we didn't have. But on the third terminal I tried. Someone had left themselves logged in. Dr. Anna Petrova, according to the user profile. The desktop was cluttered with spreadsheets and data analysis programs. I clicked through several files, finding mostly technical readouts I couldn't understand. Frequency analysis, radiation measurements, seismic activity logs. Then I found a folder labeled Anomaly 7 Recordings. Brian, check this out. He came to stand behind me as I played the first audio file. Static at first, then a pattern emerged. a pulsing tone that seemed to modulate in complex ways. Not random noise, but not any kind of communication I recognized either. "Sounds like whale song," Brian said, but wrong. The second file was similar but louder, clearer. The third made my skin crawl. The same signal, but now with what sounded like whispers beneath it, too faint to make out. "When were these recorded?" Brian asked. I checked the file data. "This one's from 6 weeks ago, the next from 4 weeks ago, the last one just 10 days ago." "Getting stronger," Brian murmured. In a locked drawer beneath the main workstation, I found a portable hard drive connected to an encryption device. The setup looked military-grade, not standard research equipment. "Dr. Emerson," I called over the radio, "we've found an encrypted data storage device in the main lab." Her voice came back immediately. "Bring it to the director's office." When we arrived, Emerson was already working at the facility director's terminal. Hawkins stood by the window, watching the storm intensify outside. The snow was coming down so heavily now that visibility had dropped to near zero. "The drive," Emerson said, holding out her hand without looking up. I passed it to her, noting how she produced a key card from her pocket, one that matched the encryption device perfectly. Not a coincidence. "You've seen this setup before," I observed. "Focus on your orders, Sergeant," Hawkins interjected. Emerson connected the drive to her tablet, her fingers moving rapidly across the screen. "Laszlo was thorough," she muttered. "Everything's here." "What exactly is everything?" I pressed. Hawkins and Emerson exchanged a look I couldn't quite interpret. Finally, Hawkins nodded. "They discovered a signal," Emerson explained, turning her tablet so we could see. "Originally detected during routine electromagnetic monitoring. They thought it was a natural phenomenon, geomagnetic perhaps, but the pattern was too regular." She pulled up a visualization of the signal, pulsing waves that formed complex, changing patterns. "This facility wasn't studying climate change," Hawkins added. "That was the cover story. Their real mission was to investigate this signal and determine its source." "Which they found in those caves," Brian said. "Correct." Emerson pulled up a topographic map. "The signal originates approximately 2 miles into the cave system north of here. Its strength has been increasing steadily for months." "What kind of signal causes people to kill themselves?" I asked. Emerson's expression remained carefully neutral. "That's what we're here to determine." I gestured toward the tablet. "Seems like they already figured it out. And it killed them." "We have better equipment and prepared personnel," Hawkins cut in. "And unlike them, we know what we're walking into." When we left the office, Brian pulled me into an empty monitoring room. "This is fucked, Jim," he said, using my nickname. "They're sending us into whatever killed these people." "With better equipment," I added. "They knew exactly what was here." Brian ran a hand through his hair, a nervous gesture I'd seen countless times during our deployments. "I've got a bad feeling about tomorrow." "We'll stay sharp. Stick together." "Yeah." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a sealed envelope. "Listen, just in case. Can you make sure Sarah gets this?" I stared at the letter he was holding out. We'd written just-in-case letters before high-risk deployments, but this was different. This felt more final. "Nothing's going to happen to you," I said. "Probably not," he agreed with a forced smile. "But something feels wrong about this mission, more wrong than usual. Just take it, okay? For my peace of mind." I took the envelope, noting Sarah's name written in Brian's neat handwriting. "I'll hold on to it. But you'll be delivering it yourself when we get home." "Thanks, Jim." He squeezed my shoulder. "I'm going to check our gear. Make sure everything's ready for tomorrow." After Brian left, I found the facility's research library. While most information was stored digitally, Dr. Laszlo had kept handwritten journals, old-school composition notebooks filled with dense writing and diagrams. The most recent volume lay open on his desk, The early entries were clinical and precise, detailed accounts of the signal's discovery and initial analysis. But as the weeks progressed, the writing grew increasingly erratic, the neat script deteriorating into a jagged scrawl. Day 47. Sleep disturbances reported by 63% of personnel. Vivid dreams, predominantly featuring geometric patterns consistent with the signal modulation. Prescribing mild sedatives, but effect is minimal. Day 58. Cognitive effects becoming more pronounced. Researchers reporting moments of clarity or insight followed by confusion. No one can articulate what these insights contain. Chen stared at his computer screen for 3 hours today without typing. When interrupted, he couldn't recall what he'd been thinking. Day 62. The signal is changing us. Roberts and Abernathy destroyed their own research yesterday, claiming it was irrelevant compared to what they now understand. When questioned, neither could explain their actions. Both appeared unusually serene afterward. Day 70. We've been wrong from the beginning. The signal isn't a transmission. It's older than human civilization. Not a message, a lure. The final entries were disturbing. The pages marred by ink blots and erratic pressure. It wants in. Not of this earth. Millions of years old. Waiting. Patient. The others have stopped fighting it. They say it's beautiful when you surrender. I've locked myself in the director's office. The gun is my last resort. Do not approach the source. Destroy it if possible. It will consume everything. I closed the journal, my mouth dry. Laszlo's final entry was a warning his superiors had chosen to ignore. And tomorrow, we'd be walking straight into whatever had driven him to put a bullet in his brain. Back in the main corridor, I found Doc emerging from the medical bay, his expression grim. "Find anything?" I asked. "Nothing good." He led me into the facility's small medical center. On an examination table lay a researcher's corpse, the skull partially dissected. "Look at this." Using forceps, Doc lifted a small, crystalline formation from the exposed brain tissue. It caught the light, refracting it in unnatural patterns. "What am I looking at?" I asked. "I've found these in every brain I've examined," Doc explained. "They're growing from the cerebral cortex, specifically regions associated with higher cognition and sensory processing." "Growing? Like a cancer?" "No cancer forms crystalline structures," Doc said. "I've never seen anything like this in medical literature. The formations are organized, almost architectural, and they appear to have developed rapidly, weeks, not months or years. Could they be responsible for the behavior we saw in the footage?" Doc carefully returned the crystal to its container. I'd stake my career on it. Something was literally rewiring their brains. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the Arctic cold. The signal. That would be my guess. Some kind of resonance effect, perhaps. Doc closed his case. Whatever it is, it's not natural. And I doubt it's friendly. I found Wilson in the communications center, staring blankly at a wall. His fingers tapped a rhythm against his leg, irregular but somehow deliberate, like Morse code without meaning. "Wilson, you good?" He didn't respond immediately. His eyes remained fixed on a point in space, lips moving slightly. "Wilson," I said louder, touching his shoulder. He startled, blinking rapidly. "Sergeant? Sorry, I was just thinking." "About what?" His brow furrowed. "I don't remember. Just tired, I guess." "When's the last time you slept?" "Last night, or..." He shook his head. "It doesn't matter. The comms are all down. No satellite, no radio. Storm interference, probably." I studied him carefully. The dark circles under his eyes could be attributed to our long day, but the vacant stare reminded me uncomfortably of the researchers in the security footage. "Try to get some rest," I told him. "Big day tomorrow." "Yeah, rest." He nodded but made no move to leave. I found Martinez in the equipment storage, methodically checking our gear. Always the most practical member of our team, he'd organized everything we'd need for tomorrow's expedition. "How's it looking?" I asked. We're good on ammo and basic supplies, he reported. Found some additional cold weather gear that'll help in the caves. Temperature readings from the research team show it gets warmer the deeper you go, which makes no sense given the depth and location. Nothing about this place makes sense. Martinez nodded grimly. I checked the seismic equipment logs. They recorded minor tremors from the cave direction every time the signal amplitude increased. Whatever's in there, it's not just broadcasting, it's active. The blizzard howled outside as we finished our preparations. The wind threw snow against the windows with such force it sounded like someone throwing handfuls of sand. No one was coming for us, and no one was getting out until the storm passed. We gathered for a final briefing in the cafeteria, carefully avoiding the dried bloodstains on the floor. Hawkins outlined the mission plan: enter the caves at dawn, locate the signal source, document everything, and determine if it posed a continued threat. What happens when we find the source? Brian asked. We assess and report, Hawkins said. Dr. Emerson has specialized equipment to record and analyze the signal safely. And if it affects us like it affected the researchers, I pressed. The exposure duration would need to be much longer to create similar effects, Emerson assured us. We'll be in and out in under 6 hours. Her confidence didn't match the caution in Laszlo's journal. Either she knew something he didn't, or she was lying to us. We dispersed to get what sleep we could before dawn. I claimed a small dormitory room, stripping off my tactical vest but keeping my sidearm close. Through the thin walls, I could hear the others settling in. Martinez's quiet murmuring as he ran through his mental checklists, Doc organizing his medical supplies, Wilson's restless pacing. Sleep came in fragments, broken by the storm's assault on the building. Each time I drifted off, I found myself back in that security footage, watching the researchers destroy themselves with peaceful smiles. In my dreams, their faces morphed into Brian's, then Wilson's, then my own. Sometime in the deepest part of night, I woke to what sounded like whispers. Not the wind, but actual voices, just at the edge of hearing, speaking words I couldn't quite grasp. I sat up, pistol in hand, listening intently. The voices continued, seeming to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. Not English, not any language I recognized, yet somehow carrying meaning that hovered just beyond comprehension. In the corridor, a floorboard creaked. I opened my door to find Brian standing there, looking as unsettled as I felt. "You hear them too?" he whispered. I nodded. "Anyone else?" "Wilson's still sleeping. Checked on him earlier." We moved silently through the facility, following the whispers that seemed to retreat as we approached. The emergency lighting cast red shadows that played tricks on my eyes, creating movement where there was none. In the main laboratory, we found Martinez sitting at one of the terminals, headphones on, face illuminated by the screen's blue glow. "You okay?" I asked. He jumped slightly, pulling off the headphones. "Couldn't sleep. Thought I'd see if I could learn anything more about what we're walking into tomorrow." "Find anything?" "Nothing good." He rubbed his eyes. "They sent 3 expeditions into those caves. The first 2 came back. The third didn't." "And they kept sending people?" Brian asked incredulously. "That's the thing." Martinez turned the screen toward us. "The second expedition returned. Different. More focused. They're the ones who pushed hardest for the third expedition." On the screen was a video interview with a female researcher, recorded after her return from the second cave exploration. Her eyes were bright, intense, her speech patterns oddly rhythmic. "It's beautiful down there," she said in the recording. "You can't understand until you see it. Everything makes sense when you're close to it." The whispers seemed to grow louder as we watched, a subtle chorus just beyond understanding. Not coming from the facility at all, I realized with growing unease. Coming from the north, from the caves. The signal had found us, and tomorrow we would be walking straight to its source. Dawn broke across the Arctic landscape, with the snow showing pink and gold colors. The blizzard had stopped during the night, leaving behind fresh snow that sparkled under the rising sun. I stood outside the research facility, adjusting my pack and watching my breath cloud in the frigid air. The beauty before me felt like a cruel joke after what we'd discovered. The whispers had receded with daylight, but they still lingered in my mind. I hadn't mentioned them to Hawkins or Emerson. Some instinct told me to keep that experience between those of us who'd heard them. "Ready to move out?" Martinez reported, approaching with his gear meticulously arranged. I nodded, scanning our assembled team. Doc was checking his medical supplies one last time. Wilson stood slightly apart, staring northward toward our destination with an unsettling intensity. Brian caught my eye and gave a small nod. He was good to go, but the tension in his shoulders told me he was as uneasy as I was. Colonel Hawkins emerged from the facility with Dr. Emerson. She carried a reinforced case that hadn't been part of our original equipment. 5 miles north, Hawkins announced, consulting a handheld GPS. "We maintain radio contact throughout. Any sign of disorientation or unusual thoughts, you report immediately." "What exactly are we looking for, sir?" I asked. Emerson adjusted her glasses. "You'll know it when you see it, Sergeant." We moved out in standard formation, trudging through snow that sometimes reached up to our mid-thigh. Even though we had specialized gear, the cold cut through our layers, and the weight of our equipment made each step difficult. Wilson took point, breaking trail with unexpected energy. "He seem off to you?" Brian muttered, falling in beside me. I watched Wilson forge ahead. "Hasn't been right since last night. The whispers. Keep your voice down." I glanced back to make sure Hawkins wasn't in earshot. But yeah, I think so. 2 hours into our trek, the terrain changed. The flat area gradually sloped upward as we approached a low mountain range. The cave entrance was a jagged hole in the base of the tallest peak. "This is it," Emerson confirmed, checking coordinates on her device. "The signal originates approximately 2 miles inside." We paused to adjust our gear at the entrance. The dark cave stretched before us. I switched on my tactical light, the beam barely penetrating the gloom ahead. "Standard cave exploration protocol," Hawkins ordered. "Mitchell, you and Callahan on point. Wilson and Martinez covering our flanks. Doc, stay with Dr. Emerson. I'll take rear security." I stepped into the cave and noticed an immediate change in the air. The bitter cold of the Arctic gave way to a strange, tepid dampness. "Temperature's rising," Doc noted, checking a thermometer on his pack. "Already 10 degrees warmer than outside." "That's not normal," Martinez said, running a gloved hand along the wall. "Cave systems this far north should maintain near-surface temperatures." "The research team documented the same anomaly," Emerson replied. "The deeper sections reach almost 50 degrees Fahrenheit." We proceeded cautiously, our lights sweeping the rough tunnel ahead. The passage sloped gently downward, widening as we advanced. After about half a mile, strange blue-green light began to supplement our flashlights. "Bioluminescent fungi," Doc explained, examining patches of glowing growth that spread across the walls. "I've never seen this species before." The organisms pulsed with soft light, creating an eerie underwater effect that made depth perception difficult. I checked my radio. "Command check, all stations." Nothing but static answered. "Comms are down," I reported to Hawkins. He didn't seem surprised. Expected. The research team documented communication failures beyond this point. We proceed as planned. The path continued downward, sometimes steeply enough to require careful footing. The temperature increased, causing moisture to condense on our cold equipment. Strange formations jutted from the ceiling and floor, not stalagmites and stalactites, but crystalline structures that caught and refracted the bioluminescent light. Brian stopped abruptly, raising his fist. I froze, scanning ahead. "Movement," he whispered. I strained my eyes, peering into the blue-green twilight. At first, I saw nothing. Then a shape moved against the cave wall, distinctly human. "Identify yourself," I called out, weapon raised. A figure emerged from behind a formation, hands raised. A man in a tattered research uniform, his beard overgrown, eyes wide with apparent relief. "American military?" he called, voice cracking. Thank God. We thought everyone had forgotten about us. 4 more figures appeared behind him, all wearing the facility's uniforms, all showing signs of weeks underground. Dirty clothes, unkempt hair, hollow cheeks. "Survivors from the research team," I said to Hawkins over my shoulder, not lowering my weapon. Something felt wrong. Their postures were too rigid, their expressions too fixed. "We've been hiding," the first man explained, taking a step forward. After the others turned. The signal got to them, but we resisted. "We've been waiting for rescue." Doc moved up beside me. "I'm a medic. Is anyone injured?" The survivors exchanged glances that lasted a beat too long, a silent communication that raised the hairs on my neck. "Martinez, Wilson, secure our flanks," I ordered quietly. The lead researcher took another step forward. In the changing fungal light, I caught a glimpse of something beneath his collar. A dark, branching pattern climbing up his neck like roots. "We're so glad you're here," he said, his smile widening unnaturally. "We can show you what we found. It's beautiful. It changes everything." Brian tensed beside me. "Jim!" The researcher lunged forward with impossible speed, crossing 10 feet in a heartbeat. I fired instinctively, catching him in the shoulder. He didn't flinch, didn't even seem to notice as he crashed into me. "Contact!" I shouted as we went down. The cave erupted in chaos. The other researchers attacked with coordinated precision, moving faster than any human should. One woman tackled Martinez, her mouth open in a silent scream. 2 others charged Hawkins and Emerson. My attacker's hands closed around my throat with crushing strength. This close. I could see his eyes, pupils blown so wide they nearly swallowed the iris, unfocused yet somehow seeing beyond me. His mouth moved, forming words in no language I recognized. I drove my combat knife into his side. No reaction. I twisted the blade, and still his grip only tightened. Black spots danced in my vision as my oxygen dwindled. A gunshot cracked through the cave, and my attacker's head snapped back, a neat hole appearing between his eyes. His grip loosened as he collapsed. I rolled away, gasping for air. Brian stood over me, pistol still trained on the now still body. "You okay?" I nodded, scrambling to my feet as gunfire echoed through the cave. Martinez was firing controlled bursts into a female researcher who continued advancing despite taking multiple hits to the center mass. "Headshots only," I called out, seeing that body shots were ineffective. Martinez adjusted his aim and put a bullet through the woman's forehead. She dropped instantly, expression still fixed in that unnatural smile. The skirmish ended as quickly as it had begun. 5 researchers lay dead on the cave floor. Wilson stood over one, breathing heavily, blood spattered across his face. Doc was checking Martinez, who had sustained a deep gash across his forearm. "Everyone report," I ordered, moving to check on the rest of the team. "Superficial injuries only," Doc replied, applying a pressure bandage to Martinez's arm. "But that woman, her strength was impossible. She nearly crushed his windpipe before he got free." Hawkins approached one of the bodies, towing it with his boot to ensure it was neutralized. "Emerson, anything you'd like to share about what we just encountered?" Dr. Emerson remained oddly composed despite the blood on her normally immaculate clothes. "The signal affects neural pathways. We knew extended exposure would result in significant behavioral changes." "Behavioral changes?" I gestured to the bodies. "They took multiple gunshots without flinching. That's not behavior. That's physically impossible." "Doc," I called, "check the bodies. Tell me what we're dealing with." Doc knelt beside the nearest researcher, the man who had attacked me. He examined the body methodically, focusing on the strange, dark patterns I'd glimpsed on his neck. Using a scalpel, he made a small incision at the base of the skull. "Mother of God," he whispered. We gathered around as Doc carefully exposed what lay beneath the skin. A crystalline formation fused to the spinal column, branching upward into the brainstem. The crystal pulsed with the same blue-green light as the fungi on the walls. "It's growing directly into the cerebellum," Doc explained, his medical training overcoming his evident horror. "These filaments are integrated with the nervous system, overriding pain responses, potentially enhancing muscle performance by bypassing normal limitations." "They're not human anymore," Martinez said quietly. "Not fully," Doc agreed. "This growth, it's rewriting their basic functions. And look at this." He pointed to patterns in the crystal. "These structures match the signal frequency patterns Dr. Petrova documented." Wilson hadn't moved from where he stood, staring at one of the dead researchers. "They wanted to bring us to it," he said distantly. "They weren't attacking. They were collecting." I exchanged glances with Brian. Wilson's affect was flattening, his eyes showing the same distant quality we'd seen in the research footage. "Wilson, you good?" I asked sharply. He blinked, seeming to return to himself. "Yeah, fine. Just processing." "We should turn back," I said to Hawkins. "Whatever's down there changed these people. We're not equipped for this." "The mission continues," Hawkins replied without hesitation. "We need to locate the source. With all due respect, sir, we've got unnatural crystal growths hijacking human nervous systems. This is beyond our parameters." "Your objection is noted, Sergeant," Hawkins said coldly. "Now follow your orders." Emerson had been scanning the bodies with a device from her special case. "The signal is stronger now. We're getting close." We had no choice but to continue deeper. I took point again with Brian, both of us on high alert after the encounter. The tunnel narrowed briefly before opening into a vast chamber that stole my breath. The ceiling soared at least 100 feet above us, completely covered in the bioluminescent fungi that cast the entire cavern in that ghostly blue-green light. Crystal formations larger than a man stuck out from the floor and walls, pulsing in rhythm with a sound that was more felt than heard. A deep, subsonic pressure against my eardrums, and at the center stood the monolith, 20 feet tall, perfectly vertical, and composed of material so black it seemed to absorb both our flashlight beams and the ambient bioluminescence around it. It was extremely dark. The surface moved slightly, oddly maintaining its shape. Across its surface, symbols moved, complex geometric patterns that rearranged themselves whenever I tried to look at them directly. Looking at them hurt my head. "We found it," Emerson whispered, her professional detachment briefly cracking to reveal something like reverence. The pressure in my skull increased as we approached, the air vibrating with energy that made my teeth ache. Each step closer felt like pushing against an invisible current. Wilson suddenly dropped to his knees, hands pressed against his temples. "I can hear it," he gasped. "It's so clear now." Doc moved to help him, but Wilson shoved him away with unexpected force. "Don't touch me," Wilson screamed, scrambling backward. "I understand now. I understand everything." He staggered to his feet, eyes wild, gun swinging between us. "It's not hostile. It's beautiful. It's been here for millions of years, waiting for minds evolved enough to comprehend it." "Wilson, put the weapon down," I ordered, keeping my voice steady despite the growing pressure in my head. "You can't stop this," Wilson laughed, a sound of pure joy that chilled my blood. "We're so small, so temporary, but it offers permanence, transcendence." He fired suddenly, the shot going wide past Martinez's head. Brian and I both raised our weapons, but Wilson was moving erratically, firing wildly around the chamber. "I understand now. It's beautiful," he shouted, bullets ricocheting off crystal formations, sending shards flying. I lined up my shot as Wilson turned toward Brian, weapon raised. One clean round to the head. Wilson dropped instantly, his face frozen in an expression of ecstatic revelation. Silence fell across the chamber, broken only by the faint rhythmic pulse emanating from the monolith. "It's getting to all of us," Doc said quietly. "The longer we stay, the more it affects our cognition." As if in answer, a burst of static came through our radios, followed by Colonel Hawkins's voice cutting through the interference. "Destroy structure, priority." The transmission cut off, but the order was clear enough. "We need to place charges," I said, unslinging my pack. "Doc, Martinez, secure the perimeter. Brian, help me with the explosives." I began removing blocks of C4 from my pack, fighting against the pressure in my skull that grew with each passing moment. The monolith seemed to pulse more intensely now, the symbols moving faster across its surface. And beneath the visible manifestations, something reached into my mind. Not the whispers from before, but impressions, concepts too vast to be contained in language, knowledge beyond human comprehension, unity across time and space, transcendence from the limitations of individual consciousness. I forced myself to focus on the explosives, placing the first charge at the base of the monolith. The black surface moved as I approached, as if responding to my presence. Each block of C4 required immense concentration to position properly, my hands shaking with the effort of resisting the monolith's call. Brian worked beside me, his movements growing increasingly distracted. He paused frequently, staring at the shifting patterns with an expression of dawning comprehension. "Brian," I said sharply, "stay with me." He blinked, turning to me with effort. "Sorry, I was just..." He looked confused, struggling to articulate what he'd experienced. "It's like déjà vu, but for things I've never seen before. Do you feel it? Do you..." "Don't listen to it," I warned, setting another charge. "Focus on the job." Martinez approached from the perimeter, his movements mechanical. "The cave system continues beyond this chamber. There could be more survivors." "We stick together," I ordered. "No one goes anywhere alone." Doc knelt beside Wilson's body, examining the crystalline growth already forming at the base of his skull. "It's accelerating," he reported grimly. "These formations developed in minutes, not days." Emerson was recording everything with her specialized equipment, her face illuminated by the screens. "The energy readings are off the scale. This material, it shouldn't exist according to our understanding of physics." I set the final explosive charge as Brian stood watching the monolith, staring upward at its impossible surface. The pressure in my skull had become a persistent agony, but I forced myself to complete the task. Once the charges were set, we could retreat to a safe distance and end this. The symbols on the monolith moved faster, almost frantic now. The subsonic pulse quickened, matching the racing of my heart. Something was building, a response to our actions, a last effort to communicate before we destroyed it. I stepped back, detonator in hand, fighting the call that promised answers to questions I hadn't even thought to ask. "Charges set," I announced. "We move back to the entrance chamber and detonate." Brian hadn't moved from his position before the monolith. His hand raised slowly toward its surface, fingers outstretched as if reaching for something only he could see. "Brian," I called, fear gripping my chest. "We're leaving. Now." He didn't respond, didn't even seem to hear me. The monolith's surface moved toward his outstretched hand like it was reaching back. "Brian!" I shouted, louder this time. The air around us vibrated with the monolith's pulsing energy, making my voice sound distant even to my own ears. Brian's hand hovered inches from the black surface, fingers spread out like he was feeling heat from a flame. The black material moved in response, stretching toward him as though drawn to him. I dropped the detonator and lunged forward, grasping his shoulder with both hands. "We need to go. Now." "Jim," he whispered, using my childhood nickname without turning away from the monolith. His voice had become softer and almost reverent. "It's not evil. It's just different. It's been waiting so long." I tightened my grip and pulled harder, trying to physically drag him back. "Whatever you're hearing, it's not real. It's affecting your mind." Brian shrugged me off with a strength I'd never felt from him before, sending me stumbling backward. In the blue-green light, his face looked peaceful, luminous, and identical to the expression I'd seen on the researchers who had killed themselves. "Don't you feel it?" He spread his arms wide. "It's offering us everything, all knowledge, all experience. We won't die. We'll transform." Behind us, Martinez called out, his voice tight with urgency. "Mitchell, we need to move." I glanced back to see Doc and Martinez retreating toward the cave entrance, Doc clutching the detonator I'd dropped. Emerson was backing away too, her equipment hastily packed. The colonel stood slightly apart, studying everything with cold calculation. "Brian, your sister is waiting for you," I pleaded, stepping toward him again. "Remember Sarah? The letter? You have a life, a future." "This is my future," Brian interrupted, his eyes never leaving the moving patterns of the monolith. The symbols seemed to respond to his attention, swirling faster where he looked. "It's shown me things, Jim. Things beyond what humans were meant to see." His eyes had transformed. The pupils had expanded until only a thin ring of blue remained. They reflected the same serene certainty I'd seen on the peaceful corpses throughout the facility. "Colonel," I shouted desperately, "help me get him out of here." Hawkins didn't move. "It's too late, Sergeant. We're losing him." I turned back to Brian, who had taken another step toward the monolith. "Please," I begged. "That's not you talking. It's altering your brain, just like the researchers." For a brief moment, Brian's eyes met mine. I saw a flicker of recognition, and of the friend I'd known for years. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice momentarily his own again. "But this is bigger than us." Then, before I could reach him, he pressed his palm flat against the black surface. The material moved like water, covering his hand instantly. Brian didn't flinch and didn't struggle as the darkness traveled up his arm. His expression remained peaceful, calm, and almost joyful. "Brian!" I lunged forward again, but Hawkins appeared behind me, gripping my shoulders extremely firmly. "It's too late," he growled in my ear. "You'll be taken too." The monolith pulled Brian deeper, the blackness flowing around his torso now. As it reached his chest, his body began to dissolve into tiny particles, his body breaking down and being absorbed into the swirling surface. "Run," Brian told me, his voice calm even as his body disintegrated. His eyes remained clear and locked on mine. "Tell them what you saw. Tell them we're not alone." I struggled against Hawkins' grip, but the colonel's hands held me with unbreakable force. "We're not leaving him." "He's already gone," Hawkins said, dragging me backward. "The explosives are set. We're leaving now." The blackness had reached Brian's neck, his head tilting back as if in release. I watched, helpless, as my best friend disappeared. His face was the last to dissolve, that peaceful smile remaining until the moment he vanished completely, particles of what had been Brian Callahan mixing into the strange surface of the monolith. I stopped fighting. Hawkins released me, and I stumbled backward, unable to look away from where Brian had stood seconds earlier. Nothing remained. Not a trace of blood, not a scrap of uniform. He was completely gone. "Move out! Now!" Hawkins ordered, shoving me toward the tunnel. My training took over where conscious thought failed. I turned and ran, following Martinez and Doc through the twisting passages. Behind us, Hawkins and Emerson brought up the rear, their footsteps resounding over the constant deep vibration that still shook through the cave system. The pressure in my skull began to ease the further we got from the chamber, but another sensation replaced it. A distant roar, building quickly, the sound of something powerful gathering behind us. "It knows!" Emerson shouted. "The monolith is responding!" The cave floor trembled beneath our boots. Crystalline formations shattered as we passed, raining sharp fragments around us. The bioluminescent fungi flared brighter, then began to blacken and die as we ran past. "Almost to the safe point!" Doc called from ahead, the detonator clutched in his hand. My lungs burned as we sprinted up the incline leading to the cave entrance. Daylight appeared ahead, a small circle of white brilliance that grew as we approached. The rumbling behind us intensified, and I risked a glance back to see darkness flowing up the tunnel rapidly. "Now," Hawkins commanded as we crossed an invisible threshold. Doc pressed the detonator. Everything exploded with noise. The pressure wave caught me between my shoulder blades, lifting me off my feet and hurling me forward. I hit the ground hard, rolling in snow as a series of controlled detonations triggered in sequence, collapsing the cave system from the inside out. The ground heaved beneath us. Snow and rock erupted from the cave entrance, with a churning cloud of debris spreading outward. I covered my head as fragments rained down, the sound of the collapse drowning out everything else for long and terrible moments. Then suddenly silence. I raised my head to find myself lying in snow 30 yards from where the cave entrance had been. Nothing remained but a pile of rubble and a cloud of dust settling slowly in the Arctic air. The others were scattered around me, Martinez helping Doc to his feet, Emerson clutching her case of equipment, and Hawkins already standing and examining the collapse coldly. The silence in my mind was absolute. The whispers, the pressure, and the call of the monolith, all gone, buried beneath tons of rock and ice. I staggered to my feet and took 3 steps before my legs gave out. I fell to my knees in the snow, the blinding daylight painful after the blue-green glow of the caves. My breath came in ragged gasps that had nothing to do with exertion. Brian was gone, and the silence in my mind was more overwhelming than any noise could be. I knelt there while the others regrouped around me, their voices quiet and far away to my ears. The vast Arctic landscape stretched before us, pristine, white, and uncaring about what had just happened beneath its surface. The sun glinted off unbroken snow, which seemed wrong after the horror we'd witnessed. Doc's hand came to rest on my shoulder, but I couldn't look up. I could only stare at the untouched snow before me, thinking of all the things Brian would never see again. His sister's face, his home, and the future he'd planned so carefully. And beneath the grief, a question tormented me. Was he truly gone? Or was he something else now, trapped in that alien darkness, conscious and aware as it broke him apart completely? I didn't know which possibility was worse. The sterile white walls of Dr. Reeves's office at Walter Reed made my skin itch. 2 months had passed since Alaska, but the memories remained clear. I still woke up most nights seeing Brian's face as the black surface consumed him, that peaceful smile that wasn't really his. I still heard the whispers when the world got too quiet. "How are the nightmares this week, James?" Dr. Reeves asked in her usual calm therapist voice. I moved in the leather chair that never seemed to get more comfortable no matter how many sessions I sat through. "Same as last week, and the week before that." She made a note in her leather-bound notebook. I'd gotten used to her routine over our mandated sessions. The careful notes, the measured pauses, and the way she watched me when she thought I wasn't looking. "You understand that repeated trauma exposure without resolution often leads to chronic PTSD," she said. "Your symptoms aren't improving under conventional therapy." Maybe because what happened wasn't conventional. Dr. Reeves set down her pen. The official report classified the incident as an accident at a climate research station. That's what the families were told. That's what the public knows. I almost laughed. The government had hidden the truth completely. Martinez, Wilson, and Brian were listed as casualties of hostile action. The cave collapse was attributed to explosives planted by unspecified extremists. The monolith, the signal, the crystalline growths, all redacted from existence. "And we both know that's bullshit," I said. "James," she warned me gently, "we've discussed this. Your experiences were traumatic, and your mind is struggling to process them in a rational framework." The same conversation we'd had a dozen times before. I looked out the window at the blue sky, wondering if Brian was somewhere out there now, transformed into something we couldn't understand. "How's Martinez doing?" I asked, changing the subject. Dr. Reeves allowed the pivot. He's adapted well. The intelligence analyst position suits his skills. His last evaluation showed no lingering trauma symptoms. Because you erased them. We helped him process his experiences in a way his mind could accept. She leaned forward slightly. He's happy, James. Sleeping through the night. Building a life. I'd seen Martinez 3 weeks ago, met him for a beer at a bar near Langley. He'd looked good, clear-eyed, relaxed, and at ease. When I'd cautiously mentioned Alaska, he'd nodded and told me about the ambush outside the research station. Terrorists with heavy weapons Brian caught in the crossfire, and a cave-in during our escape. All of it false, planted memories that had overwritten the horror of what truly happened. He believed every word. That's not Martinez, I said. He's been changed. Dr. Reeves sighed and opened a drawer in her desk. She removed a folder and placed it before me. The memory suppression therapy is non-invasive, she explained, sliding a prescription across the desk. You'll still remember Alaska, but the traumatic elements will be softened. You can have a normal life again. I stared at the prescription without touching it. The medication had a long chemical name I couldn't pronounce, followed by dosage instructions. Twice daily for 6 weeks, accompanied by guided therapy sessions. And if I refuse? I asked. Then the nightmares continue. Your official diagnosis remains PTSD, but we both know it's more complicated. She folded her hands on the desk. James, you've been through something terrible. You deserve peace. Peace. As if forgetting was the same as healing. My mind drifted to Sarah Callahan's face when I'd delivered Brian's letter 3 weeks after we returned. I'd found her in Minneapolis. I remembered the way her hands had trembled as she opened the envelope, how her bright blue eyes had filled with tears as she read his final words. I'd held her as she wept for a brother whose body would never be recovered. I couldn't tell her the truth, that her brother hadn't died from a terrorist's bullet but had been taken by something ancient we couldn't understand, that he'd walked willingly into that darkness with a smile on his face, that sometimes, in my nightmares, I still heard his voice calling. I saw Martinez last month, I said instead of answering Dr. Reeves's implied question. He told me about the ambush, about how Brian died heroically saving others. That's what happened, Dr. Reeves said carefully. Is it? Because I remember something different. I remember a black monolith that shouldn't exist. I remember crystal formations growing in people's brains. I remember Brian being absorbed into something that rewrote reality around it. I leaned forward. Which version is true, Doctor? The version that lets you live with yourself is the true one. Pretty philosophical for a military psychiatrist. She ignored my provocation. This will be our final session, James. The mandatory evaluation period has concluded. What happens next is your choice. I picked up the prescription, feeling its weight. Such a small thing to reshape a man's mind. I thought about Martinez and his clean conscience. I thought about sleeping through the night without seeing Brian disappear into that impossible darkness. I thought about the questions that haunted me. Was Brian truly gone? Had the monolith been destroyed or merely buried? Would others find it someday? I need my memories, I finally said, pushing away the prescription. Without them, I'm not me anymore. Dr. Reeves studied me, her professional expression changing just enough to reveal something that might have been respect. I expected you'd say that. She closed the folder. You understand what you're choosing? The nightmares will likely continue. The memories won't fade as they naturally would. Some things shouldn't be forgotten, I replied. Someone needs to remember what happened. Someone needs to know what's out there. Even at the cost of your peace? Even then. She nodded slowly. Very well. I'll note your refusal of treatment in your file. She hesitated before adding, for what it's worth, I think you're making the right choice, not the easy one. but the right one. I stood, realizing this was goodbye. After 2 months of weekly sessions, this sterile room had become something I'd gotten used to. Will they be watching me? Probably, at least for a while. She stood as well. But your security clearance remains intact. Colonel Hawkins saw to that. Hawkins. The name still brought a surge of complicated emotions. After the cave collapsed, he'd been coldly efficient, getting us back to the research station, arranging extraction, and beginning the cover-up. He hadn't spoken to me directly since we'd landed back at Fort Bragg. I wondered what he really knew about the monolith, what Emerson had told him after examining her data. What happened to Dr. Emerson? I asked, realizing I'd never thought to ask before. Reassigned. That's all I know. I nodded, unsurprised. People like Emerson vanished into government secrets, returning years later with new identities and classified projects. Take care of yourself, James, Dr. Reeves said, extending her hand. My door remains open if you need it. I shook her hand. Goodbye, Doctor. As I walked through the corridors of Walter Reed for the last time, I felt strangely lighter even though I'd chosen the harder path. The memories would remain, raw and painful, but they were mine. Brian's story would continue in me, unaltered by chemicals and careful therapy. Outside, spring had arrived in D.C., cherry blossoms lining the streets in delicate pink. I paused on the steps, letting the sunlight warm my face. In my pocket, Brian's dog tags clinked softly against my own. Colonel Hawkins had retrieved them from his quarters at Fort Bragg and wordlessly handed them to me before going back to his office. I had another appointment to keep. Sarah had invited me for dinner, a small gesture of thanks for delivering Brian's letter. We'd spoken several times since then, brief conversations that avoided the topic of her brother's absence. She didn't know the truth, and she never would. But I could still honor Brian's memory by being there for her, by remembering him as he truly was, not how he ended. As I walked toward the metro station, I accepted my decision. The nightmares would continue, but I would remember. I would preserve Brian's story and stay alert for when something ancient might reach out from the stars again. Some difficult things couldn't be forgotten, only faced with dignity. And as the city moved around me, full of people who would never know how close humanity had come to encountering something we couldn't understand, I moved forward into whatever future awaited.